I'm zooming in from Winnipeg, Manitoba, which is Treaty 1 territory and the homeland of the Red River Métis. And here in this freezing cold prairie city, I serve as the Indigenous Settler Relations Director for Mennonite Church Canada. Now, before we proceed with tonight's happenings, I just want to let you all know that we are recording this evening's event. So if you wish not to be recorded, you can turn your camera off and you can remove your name from your profile. You can do that by just clicking on the three dots that are in your Zoom frame. Or if you're in the mood to have a little fun, you can simply disguise yourself using one of Zoom's amazing video filters like Sad Kitty or Happy Bear, or my personal favorite, there's even a Pope Francis Zoom filter that you can have, whatever makes you happy. All right, that's about as much humor as you're gonna get from me tonight. We're gonna get serious from here on out because we've got such a good and important conversation to engage with our guest teacher, Adrian Jacobs. As you all know, this webinar series is about treaties and covenants, sacred relationships made, and sacred trusts broken. Tonight, we're going to explore what our covenants, like the two-row wampum, mean for current struggles around land and Indigenous-led movements like Land Back. And together, we will ponder what the church can or should do to join these struggles. Now, speaking of land, it's our practice in these webinars to acknowledge the various territories and host nations from whom and where we're all zooming in from. And this is a part of our ongoing commitment to learn the local stories, to grow in genuine relationship, and to pursue a reconciliation with meaning, a reconciliation that practices reparation. So we've done it a few times already in the lead up to 7 Eastern time, but if you haven't done so, we welcome you to do this, and that is to type in the chat the names of the host peoples and the lands from where you're zooming in from. And if you aren't sure about how to go about that, Peter Hairsnape, who is serving as tonight's chat moderator, Peter will offer a web link in the chat that can help you take that first step. All right, at this time, I'd like to invite my dear friend Mim Harder to center our gathering in a good way with a prayer and some opening words. For those of you who don't know Mim, she grew up in the Markham area and she has both settler and Indigenous roots. Mim works with MCC's Indigenous Neighbors program and also with Willow Grove, which is a wonderful outdoor education center in Stouffville, Ontario. Mim works with them as both a grandmother and a lead facilitator of the Kairos blanket exercise. And Mim strives to honor our Creator by building bridges of understanding between the nations. Sweetgrass women, Wingeshke Ikwe, is the name that Mim has been given by various elders. So thank you, Mim, for being here and for blessing us.
Thank you, everybody. It's good to see so many faces here tonight. I always knew that Adrian draws big crowds, and I think we're close to our all-time high on Zoom attendance, so that's really cool to see. I'm going to do a smudge, and I know not everyone is really comfortable with smudging. They don't know what it is, or they're just not sure about it. To me, it's kind of like a prayer, and it just gives us an opportunity to stop and to put away our day, everything that's happened today, good, bad, whatever. Just tuck it in the corner, put it on the shelf, and leave it there until we finish tonight. And I want you to bring your heart. I want you to bring your listening ears to really be able to hear, not only hear, but hear to what Adrian is going to share tonight. I think this is an important topic. I think it's something that a lot of people don't understand. And so I hope you're really able to hear beyond those words and understand what you're going to receive tonight. Land for Indigenous people is everything. It is where we all come from. We were made from dirt, and we will return to dirt and to the earth. Um, and I think that's an important thing to remember. The earth doesn't need us, we need it. And so we need to take care of it. And in taking care of it, it also means to be careful what we do with it and do it in an honorable way. So I'm going to ask you just to take a moment, whether you want to close your eyes or just want to sit quietly for a minute and just clear your mind. Like I said, put all today's doings on a shelf off in the corner, whatever you need to do, and silence your heart and be ready to listen. I give thanks to Creator for giving us this time together, for giving us an open heart, an open mind, and ears that can listen without judgment and to understand the path that we all have been given to walk. I give honor to Adrian for being here, for being willing to speak. And I honor each of you for taking time out of your busy or not so busy day, depending on where you're at in life, to learn and to attempt to understand what Indigenous people are walking, not just here, but all over the world. Thank you for silencing your mind and your heart and for listening well.
Thank you, Mim, for the smudge and for your care for this circle. Now, for some of us, these conversations around treaty and covenant are pretty new. And for others, they're familiar paths. And it's about going deeper. But for most, these are not the easiest conversations to engage. So if any of you participating in tonight's gathering need someone to talk to in order to process what you're experiencing, Mim has graciously offered to be a support for us, a health support. So Mim will put her number in the chat so you can make that connection if need be. Thank you, Mim. All right, it's now my great pleasure to introduce my good friend, Adrian Jacobs. Adrian is a father of 5 and grandfather of 3. I got that right. The newest one was born in January. And currently he is the keeper of the circle at Sandy Soto, which is the Indigenous Ministry Training Center for the United Church, located in Beausejour, Manitoba. So Adrian lives in Treaty 1, and he absolutely loves minus 30 Manitoba weather. But a good piece of his heart is in the Haldeman Tract and the lands where many of you all live, the lands of the Haudenosaunee. For Adrian is of the Turtle Clan, of the Cayuga, which is one of the 6 nations that comprise the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. Now, if you want to talk about politics and about covenants and land, Adrian is your guy. And if you want to talk about Jesus and justice, Adrian is always game. He is, and I don't say this, I say this with the utmost sincerity. Adrian is a prophet in our midst. He's a prophetic voice, one that the church needs to hear. But you should also know that Adrian is a lot of fun too. Incredibly personable. And he's just as happy to talk about Bob Dylan and Bruce Cockburn over a beer. Adrian's one of my favorite human beings, and I'm honored to call him friend. Adrian, thank you so much for doing this. We are so glad that you're here with us. Now, before Adrian dives into his conversation, just a minute, I'll pass it over to you. I want to let everyone in the circle here know, and we got a big, beautiful circle tonight. Our conversation will go till about 8:20 Eastern time. And as Adrian shares, you're all welcome to write questions or helpful comments in the chat as we go along. And Peter, our chat moderator, and myself may interject from time to time to ask Adrian to pick up on one of the questions that you've written there if it seems to fit well, or to invite reflection on one of your comments. And if we don't get to your question, we have this great circle, this Truth and Reconciliation Working Group, that will do our best to follow up this webinar with an email next week that has resources where you can go to find a response or two to your question. So with that, Adrian, the Zoom floor is all yours.
Thank you, Steve. I'll pay you well later. I've been really missing visiting with my friends. One of the gifts I think that I have to engage with is networking. And I've been able to do that across the country and then locally here in Winnipeg. And so I've really appreciated being able to visit with Steve and his family. It's been a good friendship. And I put this picture of myself. It's not a painting. It's a filter. It's a app that takes your photograph and then makes it look like a painting. And so I thought it looks better than me, so I'll put it up in this introduction. And Steve mentioned my newest grandchild, my first granddaughter, Juniper Artemis, and she's gazing up into her father's eyes, my oldest son David's eyes. And my clan name is Gunusano. And my grandfather said that means Deer Lodge. And I grew up at Six Nations, close to Hagersville. Went to Hagersville High. I went to Germany, West Germany actually, in 1975 with the Waterloo Oxford Glee Club. So I told my kids, because there were 5 of us from Six Nations that were a part of a native dance troupe. And so we went over with the Glee Club, and they had their choral numbers and coordinated dance numbers. And I used to tell my kids, you watch Glee on TV, I lived it, as a way of telling them that my life has been very interesting. And so I've got 2 other grandsons. And I have 3 sons and 2 daughters, and really glad that once we're able to travel again, that I'll come back to Six Nations and to Brantford and to Etobicoke and visit my family. From 2007 to 2010, I had worked with Mennonite Central Committee Ontario in the Aboriginal Neighbours program. And I was doing the liaison work, community liaison work of educating the 26 Mennonite churches that were in the Grand River Tract, but then the other constituencies across the country of Mennonite folk in different conferences that were interested in the issue. And so I traveled various places across the country to do that work. And this is a picture from a walk that we held leaving Sterling Avenue Mennonite Church and going to downtown Kitchener. And I'm holding the two-row wampum flag and explaining, I think this is near the MP's office, explaining the relationship that was originally intended. And so in this session with you, I want to address the current issue of 1492 Land Back Lane and then the whole land back movement. But I also want to go back to that time that was sparked by the 2006 conflict in Caledonia. And it was out of a prayer meeting that was being held between pastors from Six Nations, New Credit, Caledonia, and the surrounding area. We met actually for the whole length of time that I was with the Mennonite Centre Committee Ontario, but also about little more than half a year before that as well. And we met for 3 hours a week, and we were praying for peace and resolution, and we were talking about the issues that were raised by the conflict that was in the news there. And so tonight I want to kind of frame what we're talking about in these three dimensions of the conflict that happened and what some possible solutions can be. There are original ideas that Six Nations had in mind in encountering European folk on this land. And then there is the agenda of the colonial system and what they were after. And then thirdly, what we are living with now, and really the mismatching, or I like to describe it this way, the colonial system was coming at issues like this, and Indigenous people were coming at it in this direction, and there was a mismatch, a failure to communicate. And so I want to talk about that a bit and talk about the idea that actually we can come together in conversation, and the idea of treaty and the Christian understanding of covenant are similar ideas. It's a recognition of an agreement between peoples under the Creator, or as witnessed to by the Creator. So I think that that's a common understanding that could be a basis for us to have a good dialogue. So I also have here with me this replica two-row wampum, and in 1613 we encountered the Dutch who came up the Hudson River to what is now known as Albany, New York. The Mohawk River meets the Hudson River there. Henry Hudson came up in 1609, but other Dutch folk came up in 1613. And so there was an encounter there, and the Dutch came and described what they were looking for. They were wanting to trade. And then Haudenosaunee people met them, and they said, well, we have some other ideas too. So we came up with a framework from our understanding, and we recorded our ideals in wampum belts. And so this is the 2-row wampum. The white belt represents the river, the Hudson River. The dark rows represent the two nations, one in a ship of state, one in a canoe of state. In each of the vessels are their leaders, their laws, their language, their ways, their religious understanding, their spirituality, etc., their culture. And it was to be an equitable engagement with one another in the common river of life. And there were 3 rows of ideals that define the relationship between the two. The first row is the idea of the desire for friendship and peace. So friendship is what really begins this whole encounter. And then this middle row is the idea of respect. That when you have respect for each other, there's a settledness that comes to you that is the definition of peace. It's not the absence of conflict, it's the idea that people are fully accepted by one another. And that's the meaning of peace. And then the third row is the idea of once you've established a good mind and a good relationship like this, you can have a strong relationship. So that was the original idea. It was translated to the British when they were in ascendancy. And then when the Americans were in ascendancy, we conveyed the same idea. And then we reiterated that to the Canadian state as well. Another original idea from us was this idea of the dish with one spoon, which is from 1701. Sometimes it's known as the John Nanfan Treaty or the Nanfan Treaty. John Nanfan was the English negotiator. And the idea here is that this is a belt of peace, and it's a belt of provision. The dish is the dark wampum beads here, giving the idea that the land is what provides the sustenance for everybody, and the spoon is the right of access. And there was only one spoon because the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the English were all invited to eat of the plenty of the land. And so this original territory actually covered all of Ohio, western part of Pennsylvania, western New York, all of southern Ontario, towards the southeast, a good portion of Michigan, all of Indiana, and a good part of Illinois as well. And so this was referred to as the beaver hunting grounds. And really the idea was that was the economic engine then, but the beaver hunting was not always the economic engine. And so the idea has always been that it would be established at a period of time, but it would be a living relationship. So it just, what the colonial system likes to do is keep it back to beaver hunting. And so we've got hunting and fishing rights, but really it's the economic engine of that territory. And so that's the dish with one spoon. So and here is a misnomer about the Haldeman Proclamation, that this Haldeman Treaty, or really Haldeman Proclamation, was a declaration by the monarch's representative in Upper Canada, and it described the territory. And remember, it's all within the dish with one spoon territory. So this is especially marked out, 6 miles on either side, of the Grand River from the mouth here at Port Maitland in Lake Erie, through Brantford and Kitchener, Waterloo, and Fergus, up to Dundalk. And this is what was surveyed out in straight lines. So it's 12 miles across here. And so that was really for our exclusive use. The rest of the dish with one spoon was accessible to others. This is about 1 million acres. And our people's territory in New York State was about 8 million acres. So it wasn't like, this was a complete acre for acre compensation, but it was partial compensation for supporting the British during the American Revolution. This is a better picture showing the city of Brantford, the current location of Six Nations, and Caledonia is right here. And then you can see where Hamilton and Toronto are, and Cambridge, Kitchener, Waterloo, etc. And then our first conflict came in 1793 because Haldeman made the proclamation of this territory, but Governor Simcoe came along and he lopped off this top portion. So it's about 275,000 acres from this point and everything north, 275,000 acres. So our first conflict over land was in 1793. And people ask me, is there any resolution from 2006 from the Douglas Creek Estates Gunestado conflict? And I say no, and I'm not really expecting anything. Mavis Etienne came and told us in 2007 that in Oka, Ganawage, or Gunnesadage rather, there was no resolution of their land claim from 1990 either. So I said, I'm not surprised that it's not been any resolution there as well. So I refer to 1793 as our first conflict, and we haven't had any resolution from then either. So the conflict for Plank Road, and here on this map, you'll see up here, this is Haldebrook Road. Caledonia is here, and Highway 6 goes into the Hamilton Mountain. Caledonia is right here. The Highway 6 proceeds all the way to Hagersville. And the Plank Road lands are 1 mile wide at Hagersville and at Haldebrook Road. And the conflict in 2006 was right in Caledonia. It was right in this territory where my cursor is. And then the current conflict is right around here. So what we originally agreed to, and this is from sixnations.ca, you can find all of the 29 land claims and all of the history to them and the legal arguments. And so in 1835, we agreed to allow this road to be put in so that there could be traffic between Hamilton and Port Dover. It was a port of delivery. So we said, yeah, you can have a road through there. And we would allow leases for half a mile on either side of what was referred to at one time Hamilton Swamp Road or Hamilton Port Dover Plank Road. And our contention is that we never changed our idea. When you lease something, you're still the owner at the end of the lease. So we never said sell the property. So the Six Nations says there is no lawful surrender from Six Nations to the Crown for the lands taken for use of that road. So that's the basis, the legal basis for the Six Nations argument. So in 2006, the conflict blew up, as many of you were aware, especially when you saw this tire fire with a black column of smoke. And people have complained about that. And from what I understand, a black column of smoke is an international sign of distress. And I was that day in April of 2006, I was in Hamilton, or rather Toronto, and I was at a meeting. And I drove back to where I was living in Brantford, and I was driving along Highway 5, which is up on the, when it goes through Waterdown, it goes on top of the mountain. And from that high vantage point in Ancaster area, up on the Niagara Escarpment, I could see that column of smoke, and I knew that there was a conflict happening. So when I got home in Brantford, I realized what was going on in watching the news. And so I went there that night after this police raid happened early in the morning. I went the next night to this site of the conflict. Originally, this lady here, her name is Dawn Smith. Her and another Haudenosaunee woman, Janie Jameson, were the two that started the protest against construction. I remember in 2005, there was an information protest in front of the development coming out of Caledonia. A whole line of our people were standing in front of the development, and they were handing out information leaflets telling about the conflict. And so Janie Jameson and Don Smith here said, this conflict has been in the specific claims of Canada's court system from 1987. So this is 2006. It's already been there for almost 2 decades, and nothing is being done about it. It's being built on. So they said, what's the use of the courts if people can build on it? And so they were supportive of our people. They were supportive of the traditional government as well. And they said, well, nobody else is doing anything. So these two ladies said, let's stop construction. So February 28th, 2006, they went to the property. They stood in front of the bulldozers, the equipment, and they said, we told you, this is our land. You cannot continue. And so the construction workers turned off their machines and they left the work site. So that wasn't too encouraging for the developer. So he went to the courts and got an injunction. And in March of that year, 2006, the police here are reading the injunction from the courts to our people on the land. We've stayed on the land. And in April 21st of 2006, there was a police raid. There were about 25 people sleeping on the site. It was cold, but at 10 to 5 in the morning, 200 riot police, OPP, came and tried to arrest everybody and clear their property. They managed to arrest 16 people, and they didn't count on the support that they had, that we had in community. So everybody text and called others from the site, and within a few hours there were hundreds of our people on the land. And eventually the police were moved off the property and our people occupied the land. So there was because of the police raid, there was a blocking of the road and for protection to keep the vehicles from being able to come to our people. So they put a barricade up, and then that drew a counter protest from Caledonia. So this is the Caledonia crowd. And these are the police officers facing the crowd. On the other side, this actually is in May, Victoria Day of 2006. This barricade was removed earlier in the day in order to let traffic go through back and forth on this Argyle Road. Somehow that enraged the Caledonia people, and so they blocked the road with their human barricade. And so there was a standoff that happened that day. And one of our elders brought forth I think this is cedar, as a symbol of peace and healing. And then there's a war club. And they said, well, we want peace, but if you want to fight, that's your choice, not ours. So they brought that out to say to the people, let's have peace, but we're not going to step down from defending our land. Well, what happened was the crowd wouldn't disperse, and so our people brought out a backhoe, and our people renamed what was called Douglas Creek Estates, the development. They renamed it Ganostado, which means the protected place. And I remember I was standing actually during this time just off to the left here on the side of the road. And I watched this backhoe begin to dig up Argyle Street. And they just got a little bit picked up here. And when that happened, I wept. It was a Kairos moment for me. And I wept because I said to myself, we are finally saying no to the ongoing abuse that we've been suffering. I've known about these land claim issues from a child. I knew that the Kinzua Dam in Pennsylvania, Salamanca, New York's Seneca Territory, back in the 60s. I knew of that conflict. My parents went down to Seneca Territory to be a part of that protest then. Johnny Cash wrote a song about that protest and how that our understanding of treaty was from the rising of the sun, as long as the grass grows and the river flows. And he wrote that song as a protest about that Kinzua Dam construction. And then I remember in Caledonia, there is a Edinburgh Square where the town hall is. And I knew our people still had claim to that land. And every time that they had the Caledonia Fair, our people would go to that town square and collect parking rent for people that were coming to the fair. And then my uncle had a little shack by the side of the river in Caledonia. And he was on the Grand River Navigation Company towpath lands. And as long as he was living, he couldn't be taken off the land. And so I knew these things growing up. So I knew that the conflict was there. And that's why it was a Kairos moment for me. A Kairos moment knowing that I was answering the question, where would Jesus be and what would he be doing as well? So that's what I felt, that Jesus was there in me and with our people in resisting this abuse.
Adrian.
Yep.
Yeah, just to ask a question, reflecting on that picture that you had of the cedar branch and the war club there, like a call to the settler communities of which path are you going to choose in this relationship? Can you, this might be a really naive question, but what are the big factors that led to that 2006 standoff, and now we have that again in 2021? How is it that a land claim that was known in 1987 drags out to 2006 and it comes to this place? What are the big factors that lead us to that this place of conflict?
Well, I think that the default answer has been, we're not going to listen to you. So the default answer for us says, okay, we're going to protect ourselves and our land then. Because this Six Nations, all of the 29 land claims are the most documented land claims in Canada, specific. We've got maps. We have records. They are in the Ontario Land Registry Act, or in the system. Actually, when you, at one time it was, I'm not sure whether they've changed it now, you can do a land transfer online for almost any property in Ontario, except when you come to these lands. You have to go to the land office to make your registration happening there. And to be honest with you, I can only say that from the time of doctrine of discovery, claiming our land out from under us, that's the default answer. We're not going to honor that with you. And the default answer is, we're not going to listen to you. We're not going to pick up the peace branch. You're not numerous and needed for the colonial conflicts anymore. So we're going to ignore you. So I'm sorry to say, that's not Christian at all, in my mind. And it's not just being honest or legal, actually.
I have a question in the chat here. Lorna is wondering, isn't the core issue about money and power as far as dishonoring the treaties?
Certainly it is. For example, money, it's a tax issue. This 200 hectare property would go up in value, and it would provide more income for the town of Haldeman. And, so it becomes an issue of a tax base. If it remains Six Nations territory, at Six Nations, we don't collect Ontario tax or Canada tax because you're not in that jurisdiction. You're at Six Nations. So it's a matter of, jurisdiction. So it is a matter of money and power. So the colonial system does not want to give up money, and it does not want to give up a jurisdiction or authority. I'm sure that perhaps some more of what I say will kind of answer that in a fuller way as well. So thanks. Be free to continue to interject.
Thanks.
So the women have this responsibility for the land. They're the ones that own the gardens and that are stewards over the land. And in fact, they're the ones that give the final say to conflict. If there's going to be a fighting for the land, it's up to the women to give that okay. And they told our people, stay on the land. And the reason women are given this kind of responsibility or have this responsibility is because for a woman, she is not interested in sending her son to fight the son of another mother. That's the last thing that she wants to do. So in order to come to this decision, it has to be a matter of survival. And so everything needs to be exhausted before that decision is made. So I think but there comes a time when you finally come to the place where you say, we've exhausted every avenue so far, and there's zero response. And then the women said, stay on the land. So that's why they're at the front locking arms. So when negotiations began, we brought out, here it is, the two-row wampum. Here it is, the two-row wampum, the dish with one spoon. Here is the friendship belt. And here's a modern replica of the two-row wampum. This is Pete Sky. He's passed away now. He was a traditional chief. Here is Leroy Hill, who is a Cayuga sub-chief. Here is Alan McNaughton, who is a Mohawk chief. Here is Ron Thomas, who is a faith keeper. He was a faith keeper at the Cayuga Longhouse. And he was also district superintendent of education. And actually, he made a proposal from the education side table that our history would be taught in high school in the Grand Erie District School Board, which goes up and down the Grand River. And the Grand Erie District School Board said, no, it's too controversial. And so they nixed that proposal coming from the education side table. And this is my Aunt Eileen, my dad's younger sister, and she's a clan mother. My uncle is a Onondaga clan chief, and this is my cousin, Josephine. She's supporting. Here's Leroy, the Cayuga sub-chief, and this is Roger Jonathan, one of the band counselors. What was interesting about Caledonia in 2006 was both the traditional system and the elected system were in joint support of each other, with the traditional system leading the way in the negotiations. My uncle, the traditional chief, is also an artist, and he wrote this appeal that we were the allies for Canada during the 7 Years' War, the American Revolution, War of 1812, Battle of Queenston Heights. At that fight, 40 of my Cayuga people died defending Canada. Also served in the First, Second World War, Korean War, Vietnam, Afghanistan. Indigenous people actually are the highest percentage ethnic of the Canadian Army, and I think also the U.S. Army, percentage-wise, of any ethnic group, more percentage-wise have served. So we were your allies, so honor your allies, honor us, Canada, land rights and treaties. And this is one of the media events. I'm not sure exactly. I think this is Dawn, and I think this is Janie. And I'm there listening to what's going on while I'm working for Mennonite Centre Committee Ontario. Eventually, the shack is arsoned, and the painting is destroyed. And this is, some of you will remember when I did hold information meetings, Ruby Montour cooked our food, served us great meals together, and then she spoke to us as well. She was an activist. She was ostracized out of her church for supporting the land claim issue, and not the church that I pastored, but another church. So she came under our church oversight, and she's buried in our graveyard at Six Nations. She's passed away now. She's a great supporter. And so in 2007 was when I started my work with the Mennonite Central Committee Ontario. And this is the Onondaga Longhouse. And when I started my work, I had Arlie Clausen, who was the Executive Director of MCEC Ontario, Program Director Rick Kober-Bauman, and Aboriginal Neighbours Program Director Lindsay Mullins-Kuna, who introduced me to my own traditional government in my position as the community liaison for the work. And so while I was very honored and I spoke for a few minutes to describe my education work, we had a lunch after that, And I sat down with Rick Hill, who is a traditional knowledge keeper, Haudenosaunee knowledge keeper, and he asked me a question. He said, do the churches pay taxes? And I knew he was referring to property taxes. And I said, no. He said, good. Then they're not a part of the system. He said, wouldn't it be great if we could have a spiritual covenant with the churches where they would acknowledge Six Nations jurisdiction over their land, their property? They could have a renewable 99-year lease and pay a token lease payment and be totally free to do their spiritual work. And then if they decommissioned their church, the land could revert to Six Nations again. So I began to share that in Mennonite churches. One church where I shared this idea, a Mennonite homeowner said to me, what if there were 1,000 homeowners that had a spiritual covenant with Six Nations and paid their, lease payment to Six Nations? I said, there's a little bit more complication that way because property taxes are tied to home value and all of that, but it could be possible. And then I went to another place and somebody says, another Mennonite homeowner said, what if 100 of our Mennonite homeowners would do that very same thing? And so there was some enthusiasm there. There were some churches and people that said, well, let's look at that. What does that look like? And so that was 2006. And I left there in 2010. I still was talking about that idea. Flash forward all the way to 2020. So 14 years after Caledonia 2006, a new development on the Plank Roadlands was started called Mackenzie Meadows. Six Nations members, led by a new generation of youth, stopped construction, just like Janie Jameson and Don Smith did. The exact same lands, the same actions, the same court injunction, the same police raid, the same continued harassment has happened 14 years later. And they dubbed this new development, it was called Mackenzie Meadows, they redubbed it 1492 Land Back Lane. And again, there was a black smoke tire fire, international call of distress. The young leaders, the young people, the next generation. Some of these kids weren't even born in 2006. Some were just babies or young boys and young women. And so Schuyler Williams is the spokesperson there, and he's been the focus of the legal actions. Him and a bunch of other people have been charged for disobeying the injunctions just like they were in 2006. The injunction actually, here it says, Justice Harbour then also gave an injunction to Haldeman County against any obstruction of any road in Haldeman forever. So there's an eternal injunction, but it never stopped our people. Actually, one day there was a conflict and somebody got shot with a rubber bullet. And after that conflict, and this is a story, I believe it's by Doc Stater, about the whole story, like the bigger story. It was published, it tells the larger story. Our people didn't just break up a part of the road, they broke the whole road up and put obstacles to keep everybody off. This is the bypass around Caledonia. They completely dug the road up and said, you're not going to attack us again. So they did that. And so my question is, here we are 14 years later. What could have happened instead of more protests in 2020 if churches took up Rick Hill's 2007 offer of a spiritual covenant with churches. So for me, when I heard Rick say that, I've been saying it in conversation ever since that time in 2007. I've said it most recently to other people. I said it in 2012 when I started working here at Sandy Soto. People have inquired into it. And to me, it's like we don't come up with new ideas. We just give you the best one first. So what are you going to do about it? We could talk and talk until we're blue in the face, and all our people will say, well, you're just like the government. You talk about it, and 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 then nothing gets done. How about doing something about it? There have been homeowners that have willed their property to Six Nations. It's very difficult to get it handed over because of the entanglement with property taxes and all of that. But churches don't pay property taxes. They're not caught in that web. It could be possible. And in fact, the doctrine of discovery really means your church property belongs to us anyways in the first place. And I say these things with a smile and with no malice. But I don't hold back either. Go ahead, Steve.
I think the circle appreciates your directness. Like that is, I receive that. I think others do. It's a sign of respect and love that you're being so direct. So thank you for asking that question of us. And so I don't mean this as a redirection by asking you another question, because I know
sure, no,
like that.
Yeah.
So two questions. One is, what have churches done? Has there been anything around this initial proposal? And then second is, what are the stumbling blocks that churches are naming or that you perceive that are preventing our communities from actually taking up this initiative that Rick and others have proposed to us?
Yeah. What I have observed, and this is not just in the Six Nations context, but there's been a lot of education, and the churches have done education, and I really appreciate that. Those are good things to do, and it needs to continue. And we did have a retreat at Six Nations with about 60 people that looked at 3 of the calls to action from the TRC, and people broke into 3 groups and asked the question, what can we do as churches and groups of people, Christian bodies, etc., do to follow up a concrete action from these 3 calls? And so that was done, and I think that people did that, and those kinds of things are ongoing. I think people chose ways in which they could direct some money. The Six Nations residential school in Brantford, I think, had a preserve the evidence rebuild of the roof in particular for the Mohawk residential school, and I think people contributed to that. And so I think education efforts have been accomplished. Mostly dedications, like ideas of commitment to support. There are a couple of United Churches in Western Canada that when they sold their property in their decommissioning, they then sent a minimum of 10% of the proceeds to Indigenous ministries. So our center has been the beneficiary of a couple of larger gifts. We were able to do a $40,000 flooring of our large hall, and we brought the kitchen up to health standards as well, to modern health standards with that help. So there have been, and then one of our presbyteries received over $100,000 to their ministry. So there have been churches that have done that and will continue to do that. One of the presbyteries out here in Saskatchewan as well gave oil lease money to Indigenous ministries. So there have been some monetary gifts, and there is a group in Winnipeg now that was inspired by all of these things, and they were also inspired by Australia's pay the rent idea to Indigenous folk. How about you pay your rent for use of our lands to Indigenous folks? So there's been many efforts across the country, but I was hoping to have an annual event at Six Nations where we could actually receive signed spiritual covenants with churches, with a declaration of the number of acres that are back into covenant with Six Nations, with a token lease amount that we could be gathering for Six Nations, probably for the Six Nations Polytech Education Center. And then looking forward to one day receiving, a property that could be utilized again by Six Nations, or even, as was suggested by some Mennonite folk, as an education center for the larger Haldeman education project.
So I have a lot of questions coming in here. Some of them you're answering as you're going. So there's a few specific ones here. Folks are asking, are you familiar with St. Philip's Lutheran Church when that congregation closed down, and Five Oaks United Church? Someone else asks, is there any interest in having the lands of the Grand River Conservation Authority being returned to the Six Nations? I don't know if Fred's offering that from his own pocket or if that's an official offer or not, but just, yeah, kind of curious. I think folks are interested in specifics. And I was also going to ask about areas outside of the Haldeman Tract, stories from, for example, untreated areas like British Columbia or places like that.
Yeah, I'll do my best to catch all of them, and if I miss them, you can remind me. I don't know about the Lutheran Church. I do know about Five Oaks. They do have a relationship with Six Nations Social Services Group, and they're making use of their facilities for purposes of meeting and other kinds of health services. COVID's put a damper into all of it for everybody around the country, but I'm sure that something will continue there. I've always made mention to people that if they would go to the nearest First Nation to them and begin a relationship with them and see in what way they could contribute in a very material, supportive, relationship building way with that community. Because that, Six Nations is very specific. You can see the survey lines, et cetera, and deal with it from that point. But there are other communities, even in Southern Ontario, just find the closest one to you and begin a dialogue.
That's great. Steve, you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, I was just going to pick up on Diane Meredith's comments from citing Ellen Gabriel. So Ellen Gabriel, lead land defender in the Oka crisis and continuing Indigenous human rights defender, mentioned in a panel one time in response to a question about what should the churches do, saying, to quote here, or to paraphrase, saying, when we see church people on the barricades at the front line supporting our land back movements, and we'll know that there's some integrity to this reconciliation work that we're doing. Can you tease that out a little bit? What the connection, like, why is the land stuff so important? We're doing this other work, education and all that. Why is this core?
Well, part of the reality is the Indigenous worldview. Our spirituality is embodied. That's why it was a Kairos moment when that backhoe was digging up the road. Because to me, it was the embodiment of no. It was the embodiment of protection. The embodiment that says we will do something very drastic to keep our people safe. And I thought that's exactly what I would do. If somebody was attacking my daughter, I would do everything in my power to stop them. And if it hurt that other person, that's just too bad. In fact, I told Mennonite Central Committee Ontario, that's my definition of something that is not violent. You could call it violent, but I'm going to do that. And, to me, that's something that you just do to protect. So the land, we call the land mother. I know it's a metaphor, but it also is the idea that our word for future generations is faces coming from the ground. So when I think of the earth, I think about my granddaughter. And I think, you're not going to mess with my granddaughter. You're not going to mess with my earth either. Because they are inseparable. It's biblical. Your body came from the ground, from this sacred earth too. So to me, it's like, that's where rubber meets the road idea. And so part of the picture is when you stand up for what matters to us, then we know we matter to you. And I remember sharing the situation with a church, and a mother came to me after my presentation, and she was very, very distressed. And she said, my son has stood with you, so much so that he too has been arrested. And she says, I just want my son to live a normal life. And I felt for her. I'm a father. I felt a parent's anguish and all of that. When my children hurt, I hurt. But I also said to her, justice is normal. To me, justice is normal. Injustice is not normal. I will not accept it as normal. And so to me, it's like when, I guess Ellen was saying, when you value what we are valuing the way we value it, then you've got some idea of what it means to us. Anything else?
Yeah, right on. Wow. So I have one of the earlier questions I was asked was very specific from Dave. The police claim they're acting on and enforcing the law, an injunction to remove the protesters who are trespassing, lots of air quotes here, who requested the injunction in 2006 and in 2012, and what court level issued the injunction to remove the land defenders?
The developers in both cases requested the injunction, and it was the court in Cayuga in both cases.
Okay, thanks. There was another question that was asked, and then there was a bunch of responses to it in the chat. I think that the basic question was around the relationship between Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee folks and the impact of the Haldeman Proclamation on that relationship. So if I understand it right, the Haldeman Proclamation sort of established Haudenosaunee land rights under the settler legal system, except then it ignored it completely. I think the question was about, what about the Anishinaabe relationship with the land, and is that featured anywhere?
Well, the Dish with One Spoon says that we have all access to the whole territory. So we've never gone into Toronto to dispute the Mississaugas. We didn't go to Rama to dispute land there. We had a specific that was identified, and that's as far as we understand to be within our rights as one of the parties to the, and our understanding is this Turo Wampum, there are different legal orders. One is the colonial legal order that's based on the doctrine of discovery, which is a lie, which has all kinds of very, very unfair approaches. And then there is the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe Peace Belt, which says we know how to share territory. In fact, if you look at some maps with overlapping territories, that's very practical, because if you shoot a deer, you have to follow the blood trail until you can harvest that deer. If it crosses a river or a stream, you can't let it go. You've got to go harvest it. And everybody who's on the other side of that, whose village is over there, understands that and permits you to harvest it. It's not going to be a mark against them. You're the one that shot it, and you're obligated to harvest it. So we knew how to share territory. Now, we had exclusive places for our gardens and our villages, and recognized that kind of jurisdiction, but we knew how to share territory. So, like, I don't know that Six Nations has any competing claims to any of the Anishinaabe territories in Southern Ontario.
Oh, thanks.
Adrian, I have a couple of follow-up questions. One is a few messages in the chat saying, I would love some written kind of explanation of the spiritual covenant to bring to my church to stoke a conversation. So if you have any resources that you can send our way, then we can pass it on to the rest of the gang. So that's one question for you.
I sent you that spiritual covenant with churches document in PDF form, so you can forward that to everybody.
Awesome.
Because it explains it more fully. I didn't have time to go through all of the details there, but the background is there. The explanation of everything is in there. And then if you go to sixnations.ca, if you want any of the legal details of any of the claims at all, you can spend a long time reading all of those 29 claims. And then there's a bunch of other supporting things. There's lots to, if you want a Bible study, if you want a living room study, you could take any of these documents, read them together, and talk about it.
Fantastic. Thanks, Adrian. Okay, I'm going to ask one last question and invite your thoughts on that and any concluding words that you have for the community. So going back to, broadly speaking, there hasn't been much pickup from the church to this idea of a spiritual covenant. Can you share with us like what the stumbling blocks are that we need to tackle as church community so that we can take this work up? What do we need? What is the internal work that we need to do so that we can both do spiritual covenant and also, like, I'm imagining that there wasn't a lot of settler Christian peoples at Caledonia on the front lines, and there is a handful at Landback 1492 Landback Lane, but we're not, as people who self-describe as people of peace and justice, we're not there in the numbers that I imagine a lot of Haudenosaunee imagine we should be.
I'll tell you a quick story. When I was a younger pastor at Six Nations, I listened to a bunch of elders that were near me during the Caledonia Fair or one of the big gatherings in the fairgrounds. And we were outside of the community hall. And I heard the word Mennonite. And when I heard the word Mennonite, my ears perked up because, I understand church history. I know about Menno Simons and Anabaptist movement. I studied it in Bible school. I know that history. I know a little bit about the history of Mennonites in Ontario, etc. So I perked up my ears. And I heard one of our elders, there were three of them there. I heard one of them say, now Mennonites, they're real people. And his term real people is the English translation for our name for ourselves, which is Ongwahoe, which means the original beings who live forever. And so he said, basically, Mennonites are Ongwahoe. We call other indigenous people Ongwahoe. We call Anishinaabe people Ongwahoe. We call Lakota people Ongwahoe because that's our word for the people. And the reason for that, he says, they're real people. Mennonites, they're real people because they help each other. And the idea was Mennonite barn building. When somebody's barn was burned by accident, all of the Mennonites got together and in a weekend they built a barn again. And they fed everybody. And they did it all for somebody that suffered tragedy, which is the history of Mennonite Center Committee and disaster relief as well. So our people said about Mennonite people that they're real people because they help each other. So you have a reputation. Maybe you don't see that in yourself or you don't live that anymore, but Mennonites are the only Christian people that I know of that were spoken well of by the traditional community, which are very anti-Christian. And I can say that I was at the front lines as a pastor. My congregation members were there. My family was there. Mennonite people were there. United Church people were there. Anglican people were there. And I can say that if somebody says, well, there was no presence. And to me, there's nothing like your physical presence that shows that you are present. And just like Job, you sit down with us in our pain and be quiet. As soon as you open your mouth, you're probably going to become like Job's tormentors. Just be quiet and be with us in our pain. And that'll speak more clearly than a bunch of pronouncements or land acknowledgements. And I think, just to be honest with you, I'll say this because I believe Mennonite folk were folk that said, we're going to embody this Christianity. We're going to be literal priests and kings. That is, we're all going to be the same. We're going to be a priesthood of believers. We're going to be a group of brothers and sisters. We're going to be a family. We're not going to have a big leader over us. We're going to live this out in a practical way in the earth. And I just say, yes, amen. When you've got your fingernails with dirt, Six Nations dirt under it next to us, that shows that you believe what you say you believe from your theology.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Adrian.
you for the opportunity. I'm glad. I know I probably provoked more questions than I could possibly answer here, but it's like I'm looking for action. I'm not looking for more forever talk. And the other thing that I can say, what's the reluctance? Lawyers.
Thank you so much, Adrian. I'm pretty confident I speak for this circle that we're so grateful for your straightforward sharing with us, for your direct conversation. This has been life-giving. It's been challenging, as it should be. These are critical conversations. And like Brother Taylor Martin mentioned in the chat, we've got internal work to do. A lot of these questions that we're directing at you, these are questions that we need to direct internally and work and then act out on. So on behalf of, I wish we could go on for another hour here, but on behalf of the Truth and Reconciliation Working Group of Mennonite Church Eastern Canada, and everyone on this webinar. We want to express our sincere gratitude for your presence with us tonight. If I can encourage the circle to maybe lift your hands to Adrian to express your thanks, that would be great. You've gifted us with a lot. And my prayer is that in the coming days, that your words would come to our hearts and minds. They would unsettle us. They would also, we'd be reminded that they're coming in the spirit of friendship. They're coming for healing and justice that benefits us all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah. I'm going to invite Mim at this time to close our gathering with some words and a prayer.
Well, thank you, Noe, so much to Adrian tonight for his words. It was really interesting to see the pictures and see some faces that I haven't seen for, well, a year at least, and some that aren't with us anymore. Brought back some pretty strong memories as well, and the feeling that I had when both of those, the first event was going on, and what I felt when this started all over again. I was also really upset to hear the Premier of Ontario come out and say, well, people need a place to live. Like, come on. And being very unmim-like, I fired off a message and said, could I please be given the honor of teaching you the history of Canada, what we now call Canada, but also the history of Ontario and why this is happening and why your comment was very inappropriate. I haven't got a response. I'm still waiting. And I'm going to continue until I get a response, because the person leading us should be more educated than that. When Adrian was talking, he talked about feeling the pain and feeling the pain of what Indigenous people are standing for and going through. And it reminded me of something that Jamie Sams wrote. And so I'm just going to quickly read that. Human beings cannot understand another's life until they have carried the weight of that person's pain, observed that person's action, and walked along that person's path, sharing the other's greatest longings and aspirations. Understanding these things, we must then be able to sleep at that person's fire, sharing every part of the other human being's dreams and nightmares. Only then can we see beyond the exterior, and only then are we free to understand our common humanness. The ancestors say that when we judge others for their faults, we have lost our balance and our personal connection to the Maker. And I think those words speak well tonight, that when we forget about the other people and the other creatures that we share this earth with, that we have forgotten our balance. We've lost our balance and our good way of living. And I hope you take the time to really digest what you've heard tonight and understand, if this was your land, if this was where you call home, and the government came in and said, sorry, that's not yours anymore, how are you going to feel? What are you going to do? What if it was your child's or your siblings or your parents? This is the land that is home. And it's not just happening here, it's happening all over this place that we call Canada. If you want to go on Dear Google and look up all the, not just the land claims, but the fight for rights, for clean water, for sustainable housing, and a way of having a living like the rest of us enjoy, you'll be tied to the computer for months, even years, because there is so much going on here that we don't hear about or we don't want to hear about. I still remember when the TRC was going on and I said something, I believe it was at work when I was working in the hospital, and they're like, what's the TRC? I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, this is all over the news. Like, well, we don't listen to the news. All right, so we need to find another way. And the churches are one way of doing that. Talking to your friends, to your neighbors, correcting assumptions that aren't true. Giving another side to the story, the real side to the story, putting a face to what is going on. So I thank Creator for your presence here tonight, for sitting and listening and asking questions and wanting to be able to find something to do. You don't have to look far to find something to do. Start here and start here. And then widen that circle to those in your house, to those next door, to those in your church, in your work. Go to Indigenous teachings. They're online right now. There's a lot of things happening online. So COVID is not an excuse. But when we're able to socialize again, go to powwow, go to events that are in communities near you. Find the community that's closest to you. I did a blanket exercise last year. Someone grew up within a couple miles of a reserve and didn't even know it was there. Someone grew up across the road from the Mushful, which is the Mohawk Institute, which was a residential school, and did not know what it was. Educate yourself. It's not hard. And it's easy to find those resources, especially now with all the technology that we have available. There is no excuse not to know about these things anymore. If you really want to know and you really want to do something, look beyond here. Look beyond the windows and the walls and step outside and honor your path and do something to change this world, because we all have that capability and that capacity. Even if we change one heart, I always say change a heart at a time, we can change a community, a city, a province, a country, and we can change the world. May Creator be with you, give you peace and rest, and hopefully an end to these different times that we're in so we can actually gather again. But I'm also grateful that we had this time, because otherwise we wouldn't have people joining from across Canada and around the world. We have people from Australia and Brazil on tonight. Like, who would have ever thought that would happen? So I'm grateful for these times, as crazy as that sounds, because we are building a community and we are able to work together and to create a change and to make this world better, not just for my generation, but for the 7 generations coming behind me, the ones who are going to lead us into the future. Chimigwach Nawe, go in peace, walk well, walk strong, and let's make this world a better place. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mim. Really appreciate that encouragement and the call to action. Just a heads up before you leave, March 24th is our next conversation. We're going to be privileged to engage Anishinaabe educator Sandy Boucher in conversation. Next week, you'll receive an email with some follow-up resources so that we can both reflect and act on the conversation that Adrian has gifted us with tonight. So about 1492 spiritual covenant, we'll make sure that you get some pieces to reflect in community around. Thank you everyone for being part of this circle. We'll officially say goodbye, but those of you who would like to stick around for 10, 15 minutes afterwards just to debrief or process, you're welcome to do that. But for the rest of you, we want to say thank you. Your presence was a deep gift to us. Bless you. Have a wonderful evening.